Hello friends, Bugs Bandy here. Thank you for coming. I had a stroke a few years back, and I still stumble over my words, and every time I stumble, I feel like I have to start over. I'm also never really comfortable in front of the camera. On live streams, I stress for hours before I do one, and even during it, I'm nervous. I already have a nervous kind of a twitch or something. I always have my knee, something on my body moving. And when I do this, it's hard. So I do a lot of take two, take three, take four, and I'm really stubborn about trying to get it right, but I never do. These stories I'm sharing on my Nomadic Confession series, some are very difficult, and some are even tragic. And today is one of those days. So I need to tell you that I'm not comfortable being up here on the camera talking. So what I'm going to do is put my picture up as I talk. So that'll make it less distraction to you and less distraction and easier for me. Also, as I edit, it's hard to cut out the facial changes and when I move. Each time I stop for a minute, take a break, I come back and it looks like a whole different setup. So I don't like that. It's just not very good. So today I'll be on the screen, but in picture, and you'll get to hear what I have to say. So I share some tragedy. I also try to share a little bit of humor or something to laugh or smile about in most of my stories. I'm afraid that today's story won't have much of that. If you're uncomfortable with sad stuff, stuff that's hard to hear, I always use the same thumbnail on all these videos in this series, and the story itself is sad. See, I can't change what has happened, and I feel like I need to share it to help other people who have gone through or are going through some of the same kinds of things. So, if you're uncomfortable with that kind of stuff, probably wouldn't want to click on the thumbnail and watch it. I have tons of other videos you can watch, and I will still be putting out regular videos, but not sharing all this deeper stuff. So, I just wanted to give you a fair warning. I never want anybody to feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for myself. I feel like I've gone through a lot, but I also have learned a lot. And because of that, I'm a stronger person. And I have learned to heal, how to heal. And that's what I hope to share with you. The book or story ends with all positive stuff because all of the changes I've made as a nomad in the last 6 years has caused me so much joy and happiness. So it does have a good ending, which all good stories do. But this is a true story, and it's a true story of my life. I hope to be able to share it with the world someday, and I want to leave it for my grandchildren. Last week, on Sunday, I shared the story of how I started smoking. I've rehashed this too many times on YouTube. I get a lot of feedbacks, a lot of it's positive, but a lot of it's not positive. So I choose not to share any more about smoking. I'm still smoking. I'm still working on it. I will quit smoking when I decide, when I want to. I'll do the best I can. But it has to be my choice, not somebody else that tell me to. I want to be a non-smoker. And God will help me. And how he does it is between me and him. So that's enough about smoking. So when I ended my last video, I mentioned that I got married. I had been pregnant with Skip's child. So let's go on from there. So my dad always controlled my life. I loved him very much, but he was not a good father. And I lived in constant fear of making him mad or disappointing him. Even as an adult, I was still influenced by him. So when he said let's go to Vegas. We didn't argue. We just got in the car and went with him. Carl didn't really love me, and I didn't love him. I still loved Skip. I probably always would. But I had promised my dad I would not go back to him. And I kept my promise for a long, long time. I was pregnant. I wasn't married. I was working, but I didn't think I could do a very good job by myself. I thought he could help me raise my son. When we got to Vegas, we went straight to the justice of the peace. I never looked like I was pregnant until I was 7 months pregnant. And then I looked like I had a great big bowling ball in my stomach. I was huge. All I had to wear is an ugly dark green dress like umpire style, which made me look even bigger. I was working. It would be nice to have a second income to help me. I was almost 7 months pregnant in a green umpire style dress, dark green. Wasn't pretty. I felt ugly. I didn't feel like a bride. But we got married. We said our vows, and my mom and dad witnessed the marriage. Then we headed to the casinos. My parents were always gamblers. Carl was 4 years older than me. He was old enough to gamble. You had to be 18 to gamble, even in those days. So we went into the casino, and I sat down in the machine and put a few dollars in. And what money we had with us. It wasn't much. Carl and my parents moved to somewhere to gamble away from me. They left me there alone. And then the security came by, and they asked me for my ID. And they told me I was not old enough to be in there. They took me outside and made me stay outside. It was the middle of summer, which is just as hot in Vegas as it is in Palm Springs. So I was miserable. They finally came out about 4 or 5 hours later, found me, and then Carl was broke. He used almost every dime we had. It got worse. When we got home, Carl had failed to call his boss at McMain's Furniture where he worked. He went to work on Monday, and they sent him home and told him to don't come back. So now he had no job. I knew I could only work another month or so before the baby was born. So we had no income. That was a great start to a new marriage, my first marriage. He right away started drinking heavily with his friends. He made me go to the welfare office, which I resented so much because I hated the feeling that I had to ask for help. And I felt like I was capable of working and supporting myself, but I couldn't during this time. And my parents had those kinds of situations off and on throughout our lives. And I remember going to the welfare. All of us kids were piled in the car. Sometimes it was really hot in the car, or really cold, and we were left there while my parents went inside and tried to get some help to get gas for the car or a repair work done, or just find a place to stay for a few days, or emergency food. Usually they gave food vouchers, not like food stamps. You had to go to a restaurant and try to buy enough food for almost nothing. Or there were a few times that when they put us up in a hotel, sometimes we had to go to the Salvation Army to get help, or the Goodwill to get help. And so we didn't do it constantly. When in the summers when we worked, we didn't have to do that. But only surplus commodities, which were government food. But other than that, there's a lot of times we had to get help. My parents tried to work as much as they could. They had a lot of faults, but they weren't lazy. They were never lazy. They taught us kids If you have to dig ditches to make a living for your family, you will do it. So they didn't teach us everything good morals, but those things they did. And my mother always instilled as many Christian morals as she could. We went to church off and on throughout our lives. And my mother was a spiritual one in our family. My dad definitely was not. Here, Carl was already, he's drinking heavily. He's starting to get very abusive. My son was born 2 months later. During the pregnancy, before I gave birth, Carl got mad one day, drinking at his brother's house, and he punched me in the stomach. And he put me to the floor. I passed out. His brother and his sister-in-law did nothing to stop it. No protection whatsoever. There was, had no way to defend myself. Nobody was there. That was the story of my life. So when my son was born, he came out kicking and screaming. Carl became very resentful because he didn't want me to spend time with the baby. He didn't want me to give any attention. He would not allow me to nurse my child. He didn't allow me to hold him. He got angry when the baby cried. He would go over and smack the baby's butt for crying. Or he was a thumbsucker at birth, and he would start hitting his face, hit his hand out of his mouth. This is hard for me, guys. He would abuse me for not stopping the baby from crying or sucking his thumb. Anyhow, I needed to explain how bad it was. So, I obviously, it was, I needed to get out of there, but I had nowhere to go. Back in those days, they didn't have places for women with abuse went, or they didn't. I had already gotten welfare, but welfare wouldn't help me. My parents were living in town, but they wouldn't help me. My dad said, "You made your bed, now lay in it." They didn't care. They really didn't care because they were abusive too. So they didn't see it was a problem. I had to put up with it for quite a while. The abuse continued. It got worse with me and my son. I was desperate. I didn't know what to do. I went back to work after my son was born, and I had a babysitter close by. I would come home from work. He would be angry and drunk and have a friend of his or two over. And he was a crazy because he wanted to have everything perfect. Every minute of the day when I'm home, I had to clean and iron. And he got mad because I left the dishes in the dish drainer to dry one day. And he got so mad he swung his arm and kicked all the dishes off the counter. Everything went flying. One day I was ironing, he kicked the ironing board over. He One night his friend was there, and I was in bed. I went to bed. He was drunk, and he woke me up and said, "Take my," I can't even remember who his friend's name was, said, "Take him home." I said, "I'm tired. I just fell asleep. I didn't want to go." Oh no, that wasn't good enough for me. He grabbed me by the hair of my head, swung me around the room, slammed me on the floor, right in front of his friend. His friend did not defend me or offer to help me. He was drunk too. I ended up passing out, of course, and he ended up taking his friend home. That was the way it was. And when he wanted something in the bedroom, he did some very strange things to me. And like I said, you may have to read between the lines here, people, a little bit, because I have to be careful. Um, so that was my life with Carl. And finally, after quite a while, I think my son was like a year and a half, maybe a year old. I finally had a friend that I could go stay with her for a while and just pay her rent to stay in her. She has a little room attached to her garage, and I was able to stay in there with my son. But then Carl come along and threatened me to kill me, things like that. And I believed him. I was scared. Finally, I agreed to meet him, and he got me to get in the car with my child. and he took me up on a mountain in the car. And he was going really, really fast around the really narrow curves. I knew he was going to drive us off the road. I said, "Pull over, please, and let us talk." See, I finally got him to pull over, and I grabbed the keys and I threw them out the car. He had to get out and look for the keys. Afterwards, I paid for it. For many years, I had a real hang-up about riding in a car with anybody. I always wanted to drive my own car. He convinced me to go back and live with him because he threatened to kill me, and if I left or tried to hide, he would find me. I believed it, so I went back. I had nowhere else to go. Another time we went to a friend's house, and this was the worst. One day we went to visit one of my friends from school. They had a new baby, a couple months older than mine, I think. Carl was sitting on the couch, and I was holding my baby Chris in my arms, and he was sucking his thumb and started to whimper. And Carl took his hand, wide open, flat-handed, hit the baby's face from the ear all the way to the front of the face to slap his thumb out of his mouth. He left a bruise and whelps, extreme, whole handprint on my baby's face. He would not let me take him to the doctor. Nobody cared. Nobody would help me. Had nowhere to go. Had no way to go. I didn't know what to do. It took me almost till my son was a couple years old before I finally broke away. I had hidden money and saved enough to get out. I finally got away from him. This is a cycle of abuse. I was abused all my life. I thought I deserved it. He convinced me I deserved it. He told me everything was wrong with me, was constantly demeaning me. I started believing it. I started believing it was my fault. I said something. I shouldn't have said something. The house was not clean enough. I didn't have control of the kid. It's on and on and on. I left him. He convinced me. He found me. He convinced me he loved me. He would never hurt me again. This is the way abuse works. They convince you they never meant to hurt you. They'll never hurt you again. All of a sudden, they're so good to you. They're loving and hugging on you and buying you nice gifts and things, trying to convince you that they really couldn't help it. They didn't mean to. And you go back and you leave and you go back and you leave. That's the cycle of abuse. But they don't change. They never change. I know, I know that this was a difficult story. It was difficult for me to tell. But I hope that somebody out there is with a man or a woman who is abusing them knows they don't have to live like this. Today, they can get help. There are shelters to go to. You can call a friend. I had no friends really, and I didn't know how to function. I was a child still myself. I wasn't even 18 yet when I got married, and my son was born a couple of months after I turned 18. I had nobody. Today, you have to find somebody. Go to some kind of counseling. Get a doctor. Call the police. Maybe they won't do anything, but if you press charges, you have to press charges. Because if you don't, they'll just do it again, and you'll end up back in there over and over and over again. At least that's the way it worked for me and most of the women I knew or know who have been abused. They just keep going back, and they're in denial. They believe they can change them. They believe they can fix them. You can't fix them. They have to change themselves. So that's the reason I needed to share it. A person that's being abused like this, especially a woman, feels helpless, vulnerable. They can't trust anybody. They don't know who to turn to. They're not going to open up unless you have a good friendship with them. They won't believe that they can actually get somebody to help. They still feel, even if they do, if they press charges or something, he'll get out and come after them. Help them to feel safe. Help them to find a place to go where they're protected. Get the authorities involved. Get them to commit to leave. If they cannot commit to leave, if they cannot commit to pressing charges, then you can't do much. Unless you actually see abuse, then you can call the authorities. But they have to be helped. Let's do what we can, people. We're not miracle workers. God is. Pray for them. Thank you for watching. People don't have to live like this, and they don't have to go through this kind of thing. I think that's a good place to end this video today, and I hope you got something from it. Thank you for listening.